My wife was in school full-time, and I was working around the clock trying to pay the bills so she could finish school. Because of this, we rarely went out and did a lot of things people our age did at the time. We still had our friends, but we rarely went out and had much fun. I guess we figured there would be time for that later. We both had separate vehicles. My wife would normally park closer to our apartment's front door, and I would normally park in our covered parking spot. She liked to park closer to the front door, so she didn't have to walk as far at night when she got out of school. Earlier that week, she mentioned that one of her friends was going to have a birthday party that Friday night, and she wanted to go celebrate at the girl's house. I told her she should absolutely go out and have some fun. I couldn't get the day off of work with such short notice. She said she was going to catch a ride with one of the other girls so she could drink a little bit if she wanted and still get home safe. I was working nights, so I knew I would be up all night if she needed anything. So the night came for the party. My wife was getting dressed, and I was getting ready for work. She put on a cute, skin-tight blue shirt and a skirt that hugged her but perfectly. I remember thinking to myself how sexy she looked and how I wished I could take her to the party. I've never been a jealous person, and as far as I could tell, it was going to be all girls at the party anyway, so there wasn't much to worry about in that regard. So I left first, and I worked about 40 minutes from my house. I mostly worked alone at night doing security for a water treatment facility in the middle of nowhere. Most of the time, I just slept at work to catch up on my sleep. I showed up at work and realized that they had double-booked the shift. The other guy that was there told me he really needed the hours, so I called my boss, and he told me I could go ahead and have the night off. I was pretty excited initially because I thought maybe there was a chance I could make it home and go with my wife to the party. I called her to see if she was still home, but I did not tell her that I was able to get the night off. Instead, I decided I would come home and surprise her. I got home and parked my truck on the backside of our building, assuming we would be leaving the house shortly after together. When I walked in the door, I realized that I was too late, and she had already left for the party with her friend. Part of me was a little bummed out, but another part of me was kind of excited to have the evening to myself to just lay around and catch up on TV shows. As I laid around the house for a few hours, I texted my wife a few times to ask how the party was going. At this point, she still had no idea that I was at home. She told me everything was going good, and they were just having a few drinks and talking about old times in high school. As the night got later, I decided to jump in the shower. I thought she would be home soon and might be a little tipsy and want to have some fun. Another hour or so went by, and I decided to text her to see how things were going again. She didn't text me back right away, and it was getting pretty late, so I decided to give her a call. Again, I'm not really the jealous type, but she usually texts me back right away. I just wanted to make sure everything was cool. She answered the phone, and I could tell immediately she had been drinking. She was laughing and carrying on. She told me almost everyone had left the party already, and that her ride took another girl to the store to get more alcohol, but that once she got back, she would be heading home. I told her to be safe and to call me when she got home and that I would see her in the morning. Roughly 30 minutes later, she texted me and said her friend wasn't back yet, but someone else was going to give her a ride back to the house. I told her to make sure that her ride wasn't drunk. In hindsight, I probably should have told her I was at home at this point and that I would just come get her, but I was really looking forward to surprising her. 20 minutes had passed, and I began looking out the window to see if I could see a car pulling up. The window overlooked the parking lot in the front of the apartments, and I could see our parking spot was still empty because I had parked on the backside of our building earlier in the day. A few moments later, a gray Ford Bronco pulled through the parking lot really slowly. I watched as it pulled over to my covered parking space and backed in. I could see inside of the Bronco that there were two people, and one of them was my wife. The driver was a male that I didn't recognize. I felt my stomach tighten, and my legs felt weak. I looked at my phone, and there was a new text from my wife saying she was almost home. I remembered that she thought I was still at work. I went out the front door and down the stairs that led to the hallway that would take you to the front side or backside of the building. I made the decision to go around the backside so I could get closer to the vehicle without them noticing me. I crossed the street and walked behind a few rows of cars. I hid behind a concrete wall that covered the garbage cans 2 spaces down from my covered parking space. At this point, the Bronco was turned off, but they were still sitting inside the vehicle. I could hear them talking but couldn't make out what they were saying. I was wearing a pair of basketball shorts, flip-flops, and an undershirt. The apartment complex seemed so still for a Friday night. There didn't seem to be anyone out. I felt like I could hear a pin drop. I stayed quiet and leaned against the concrete wall, watching the truck. A few moments later, it finally happened. I watched him lean over his seat toward my wife and try to kiss her. She pulled her head back and said something to him. He said something to her, and then she giggled under her breath. He then leaned in again, and this time she leaned forward. They began making out in the front seat of his Bronco for about 5 seconds. I felt every hair on my body stand up. I was angry and confused, and part of me wanted to go smash out every window of the Bronco and drag him across the parking lot. Watching for a moment and not reacting, I began to withdraw from that idea. Suddenly, I found myself strangely aroused watching the two of them make out and touch each other. This went on for a few minutes before things started to escalate. She quickly backed up and said something to him. This time, I could hear him clearly say, "Nobody can see us." He then folded his driver's seat back toward the back bench seat. His seat was laid all the way back, and she was in the passenger seat, turned towards him. She then pulled his pants or shorts to the ground. It was a little difficult to see her face because of the angle I was at. She leaned over him again and was halfway on top of him. She kissed him before slowly working her way towards the steering wheel. I could no longer see any of their faces. I could only see her head slowly moving up and down with his hand caressing the back of her neck. I could hear him breathing heavier and a few low noises coming from her. I'm not sure I've ever been more turned on in my entire life. Something about just hearing it made me so excited that I almost forgot that I was standing outside hiding behind a dumpster. There was no light directly on me, so I could not be seen by any of the apartment windows. After a few minutes, I heard her say, "I have to go." He sat up and said, "Let's get in the back." Suddenly, his driver door popped open, and he jumped out. She sat up in her seat and was looking at her hair in the rearview mirror. He was tall and skinny with light brown hair. He was white and had a good amount of muscle on him. He then pulled his seat all the way forward and began climbing into the back bench seat of the Bronco. I could see her laugh as she fumbled her way between the two seats into the back with him. I watched as the two of them shuffled around in the back seat for a few moments. My eyes were locked on anything I could see moving around in the back. From what I could tell, my wife was lying flat on her back, and he was lying on top of her. I could tell things were starting to go down based on the sounds coming from the car. I could see the car slightly rocking around as he was sitting up almost all the way. She was breathing heavily but was still not making much noise. Her hand reached out, grabbing the bottom of the rail by the window. She then turned back around, and I could hear her say clearly, "Go slow." His response was the complete opposite of slow. I could see the car rocking rapidly back and forth again. I did not have the best view of this. It was mostly shapes and sounds, but a little bit of light would creep in, and I could see his shoulders and her back. The car shook rapidly for at least 10 minutes before the movement started to slow. I heard both of them let out loud noises, and I saw her turn around and kiss him again. I didn't stick around any longer. I began heading back to the apartment building, running up the stairs and into the apartment. I quickly turned off the hallway light and jumped into my bed. I laid there for about 5 minutes, still feeling a mix of excitement, anger, sadness, and arousal from what I had just witnessed. I could hardly breathe. A few minutes later, I heard his truck start and pull away. Then, I heard the front door open and close. She must have realized at this point that I was home because she called out, "Babe, are you home?" I pretended to be half asleep and replied that I was in the room. She walked back towards the bedroom, and I told her that I came home early because of a mix-up at work. She seemed nervous and must have been wondering if I had seen any of what had just happened. She grabbed a towel and a pair of sweatpants from the drawer and started walking toward the bathroom. I was too worked up and wasn't going to wait. I stood up and followed her to the restroom, pretending I needed to use the bathroom. When I got behind her, I hugged her from behind and could see her makeup was a mess, and her hair was wild. I unzipped her skirt, and as she leaned forward on the sink, we both realized at the same time that she hadn't put her underwear back on. Both of us stayed quiet as we started what she had just finished with someone else a few minutes earlier. I only lasted for about 30 seconds. She then showered and I went to sleep. We never talked about that night.